Welcome to an interview with Russinovich from Microsoft. My name is Robert Hogg. I'm an MVP from the UK. I'm sat with Rick Hepworth, who's also an MVP from the UK. And let's get cracking. So, first of all, welcome to the UK. Hope you're having a great time.
Having a great time.
First of all, because I don't want to be rude because I'm English, how do I pronounce your surname?
It's Russinovich.
Russinovich, yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. Now, a lot of us know you from your sysinternal days. Mm-hmm. You obviously moved on to Pastors New, which we'll talk about in a second. Do you still have anything to do with the sysinternal guys?
Yeah, actually, I am a sysinternal guy still.
Okay.
So it's a hobby of mine. I still continue to develop the tools, run the website. There's a few developers at Microsoft that I've helped contribute code to some of the tools, but for the most part, I'm still the sole developer after Bryce Cogswell, the co-founder of sysinternal, retired from Microsoft a few years ago.
Wow, that's quite good. That's cool.
Yeah.
Can you actually see a similar set of tools evolving for Azure?
Yeah, I think there's the opportunity to develop tools to help people monitor and deploy and diagnose their applications, and we see a lot of these tools show up in Codeplex and GitHub and be shared by the community. Our CAT team develops tools like that, so lots of opportunity there to develop those kinds of tools. I have not developed any of those myself. I still continue to develop the sysinternal tools, and my full-time Azure job is to work on the product itself. The fun thing about sysinternals is it's a hobby that is kind of separate, and it's very single box. I can just go develop it in wherever, in the train, the bus, or the plane, and have fun doing that.
Yeah, what a hobby.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, focusing on Azure.
My turn.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yes, you picked a nice small area when you moved into cloud. So, I mean, Azure covers IaaS, PaaS, services, and it also covers IT and dev, and the new emerging DevOps. So, where would you suggest is the best place to start to learn about Azure, to find information on what's in the box, if you like?
I think over the past few years, we've done a great job of revamping the Azure MSDN portal. So if you go to azure.com, that gives you a layout of the different services, and you can drill into each one, and there's right there tutorials on just how to get started, like 1, 2, 3, here's how you set up a website, or here's how you do an Azure VM, here's how you get the Visual Studio tools, the PowerShell tools, here's how you write an Azure client for iOS, for example. So really nice layout to drill right in there. And some of the videos, we've got a bunch of videos up, including some of mine about fundamentals of Azure, and so I think a ton of material there to get started with.
Okay. And the pace of change is extremely rapid. How do you keep up, and how do you suggest that people like ourselves keep up with that change and keep up with the context that change is happening to stay current?
It's a real challenge even for me to keep up with what's going on, because Azure's gotten so big that it now is not just an Azure team that's working on it, but a whole, lots of Microsoft is now working on it, so it's hard to keep track of everything even for me. But just for the mainstream Azure releases, the Azure blog, Scott Goo's blog, those are the two places to follow releases of Azure features. Channel 9's got a bunch of, whenever there's something new, there's almost always a video on Channel 9 that covers the feature. Like we just did our D-Series virtual machines, and there was a video on Channel 9 about the D-Series virtual machines and talking about it. So that's another place to keep up with changes.
Okay. And how do you see the MVP community, both in the UK and internationally, helping to drive that sort of information push?
Yeah, well, the MVP community is really our voice, and it's kind of hopefully an unbiased voice, a true voice that's separated from Microsoft and lets us magnify our message, but get it out there to people that are actually on the street connecting. As far as the MVPs helping to spread through blogs, through their own podcasts and webcasts, dealing with customers and people at work, and having community events, spreading the word that way, those are all fantastic ways that we see the MVP community helping us out.
Okay. I need to give a quick plug now for the Cloud OS Roadshow that started here in the UK and I know has now gone worldwide, hasn't it?
Yeah, and that's a roadshow like that does a great job of reaching out to the community out there and taking the show to them, so to speak.
So as you've written so many tools, quick question, Of all the tools you have, which one could you not live without?
Zoom it. I think if there's one. Zoom it is my screen magnification
Yeah.
and annotation tool. So whenever I'm doing technical
Demos,
presentations,
yeah.
do demos, yeah.
Okay. So actually think about Azure in general context. What do you think is the most innovative part of Azure?
That's a tough question to answer because there's a lot of innovation at all levels of the stack. The ones that I'm particularly passionate about, some of the internal infrastructure that we've got to support the scale, which includes the application development model and engineering systems that support the DevOps that we've got. And the unfortunate thing is that we haven't yet made it publicly available. And that's something that we're working on doing, is trying to get these development tools and systems out there so that other people can take advantage of it. And there's huge innovation there when I look at what we've got and the kind of scale that we've got. You know, everybody's talking about microservices and DevOps. These are exactly the kinds of systems that we've designed internally for Azure and services that run on Azure. And when I look out what's available in the outside world, nothing comes close to what we've got. And so that's what's really exciting to me, is to know that we're going to be bringing that out over the next year or so.
Excellent. So again, think about Azure. Which is the one feature you think gives the most value to users?
The most value to users, the one feature. I mean, it's tough to classify a feature in terms of cloud and Azure, but I would say that a real turning point for Azure adoption and Azure awareness was infrastructure as a service. So if you want to call a whole collection of features and functionality as one feature under the umbrella IaaS, that would be the thing that really shot Azure up to be something that people could take advantage of. It's simply because IaaS let them bring their existing code and tools and processes to bear in the cloud, whereas PaaS, of course, is much better at greenfield type of application development, requires a change in mindset, and that posed a hurdle when we only had PaaS for companies that wanted to get into the cloud but leverage a lot of the existing stuff that they had.
So in Azure, I think you might have already talked about this in the first answer, but is there anything in Azure where you sit back and go, wow, that's just wow, either scale or size, or that thing that makes you sit back and just go, wow?
Yeah, it is the scale actually, because and that's also what's exciting, is running at the scales of millions of servers and millions of virtual machines, and we're just getting started on that kind of scale. That's what makes me go, wow. Deploying software to that kind of scale, monitoring that kind of scale. And the fascinating thing about it is, if you go to our network operations center, which is sitting in the building that I'm in, it's a part of a floor. You go in there and there's like 6 people in the room with just a few monitors on the screen. And those are the guys watching all of these data centers with all of these hundreds of thousands, billions of servers around the world, and that's it for the people that actually just watching it day in and day out. So really, and if you go take a tour of the data center, data centers got like 10 people for the whole data center, and half of them are security guards. And that's it when it comes to running that kind of scale with a hands-on manner. So that blows my mind.
It shows what scale software. What software is really for?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. I've been reading sort of seeing lots of things about things like Docker, where people are coming along and saying, actually, things like Docker, I actually don't really need a PaaS solution.
Yeah.
I'm quite passionate about PaaS because I see it as a proper scale solution. What are your thoughts?
I'd see Docker and containers as a tool. It's not a programming model. And actually, I think you bring a programming model into a container, and a container is a way to package it up and deploy it. But it's really two orthogonal things. So a lot of the ways that people are using containers today is basically the same way that they developed IaaS code. So they'll take MySQL and they'll put it in a container, or they'll take Apache and put it in a container. But from the perspective of the programming model that they've got around it, it's similar to the programming model they had for virtual machines. Now what you're seeing come on top of containers are orchestration systems. Google Kubernetes is an example. And that's where I think the real IP is, and where PaaS starts to come into the picture, which is, I'm going to write an application that knows that it's part of this collection of containers, and there's a substrate there that lets those containers communicate with each other. And there's something that's orchestrating updates across the containers in a safe way. When I referred earlier to the kind of infrastructure that we've got running internally, the PaaS runtimes that we have internally supporting our middleware, that's what I mean is that kind of orchestration system that does updates and deployments and versioning and health, and that's where what I believe we've got is much more sophisticated, and what we can bring to bear is a system like that on top of containers, for example.
And I'm saying that people don't really understand the power of the Azure platform as a service, and for exactly those reasons, I personally think it's really powerful.
Yeah, and it's just gonna, I think we've got a lot more power coming.
Excellent. So moving on to security, which I know is one of your key areas. People are worried about cloud security. Should they be?
Yeah, I mean, people should be worried about security anywhere. As we can see, breach after breach, people aren't worrying enough about security. What cloud brings to the picture is new systems and new tools, new processes that people aren't familiar with. And so there's a learning curve, like what is this world? What does it mean to have my corporate network connected to a cloud network? What does it mean to manage virtual machines that are really ephemeral, not long running? You know, where a developer will go and fire them up and they run for a couple hours and then they go away. Very different model from traditional IT, where a virtual machine is procured much like a server. You deploy it and it sits there and runs for a few months, and that means it's got this whole life cycle of process, security process around it, configuring it, monitoring it, managing the updates to it. When you move to a cloud model, it changes a lot of that. The agility, the distributed nature of the provisioning of those kinds of resources that traditionally used to be deployed only through central IT. The PaaS services, the SaaS services, all the credentials that are flowing around for all these things, and the fact that business units can go directly to the cloud with a credit card and fire up a SaaS account. Those kinds of things are the learnings that are changing the way that IT needs to look at security and compliance and governance from the way they've traditionally been doing it with on-premises environments, where they're the ones setting up the applications, to this cloud model where their end users are going and setting up the applications.
Well, actually brings you nicely on to, probably should have turned your phone off. Bring your own OT. I've heard you use the phrase bring your own OT several times.
And I think it's catching on, actually. I've
It
heard
is.
somebody else say it.
So first of all, what does it mean, or what do you mean by it? And much more importantly, what are the implications to traditional corporate arenas like IT, where they just don't see it coming?
Yeah. Well, so one of the other terms that people have been using for this is shadow IT, which is exactly what I said, these business units that are wanting to take advantage of the agility of the cloud. And so they bypass corporate IT, not even telling them what they're doing. Examples are the marketing department going and signing up for Salesforce.com, or the sales department going and signing up for IaaS in a cloud so that they can stand up virtual machines and then deploy a database there. Instead of going through corporate IT, where they would normally have to go and say, I want a virtual machine, and then the IT departments can provisioning a server, the network, the operating system, setting up the virtual machine, and it can take weeks to months for them to get it going. And corporate IT is not aware that this is going on, so that's this shadow IT, to bring your own IT. The business units, just like the employees are bringing their own devices in, not getting them given to them by IT with the bring your own device movement. They're bringing their own IT in the form of a cloud provider to deliver their services rather than going through central IT. And the risk here is that corporate IT, if they're not in the loop on this, then they're not aware of what's going on, and they can't ensure that corporate governance and safety is being, around data handling is being followed. So the risk that poses to the business is you have these business units that are not following corporate governance rules just because they're not being overseen and they're not educated as to what they should be doing. They're putting sensitive corporate data in the cloud, and they're not following proper security handling procedures. They've got credentials to these services that they're not securing in the right way or tracking in the right way. Corporate IT is not aware of it, and so they can't come into the picture and help them. And so that's what the problem that is happening in a lot of these companies is they're entering this phase of unsafe data and corporate governance just because the corporate IT is not in the loop. Now, the only way to fix this is for corporate IT not to come into the loop as something that's going to block this movement, because they're not going to stop these business units from trying to get their business done. And the business units have obviously determined that they can get their business done more efficiently, faster, cheaper by going to the cloud services. But corporate IT needs to figure out a way to partner with them, to enable them. So, like, for example, how does a business development unit figure out how to use cloud services and cost it appropriately and set up subscriptions and secure it? If corporate IT was going around saying, we're the guys that can help you get onto the cloud, and all you have to do is come to us, and we've got everything set up, and we can get you going, and we can get you going in a safe way, then that's the only way that I think for them to get in the loop and try to remedy this problem.
Yeah, I see, and the reason seems to be a lot of corporate IT. I've certainly been in a corporate as part of our function and our day job, where it was 6 months to provision a machine.
Yeah, and that's just unacceptable these days. Yeah.
And maybe it's a move that will actually start getting corporate IT to start coming out of their box and moving forward.
Yeah.
In the changing world of technology, where do you see the cloud going, more specifically Azure, over the next 10 to 15 years? And that's a lot. It's a long question. It's a long question.
So just a few trends. I mean, what I see is that in 10 or 15 years, the vast majority of the world's computing will be in public clouds. So we're talking on a scale of tens of millions to hundreds of millions of servers in 10 or 15 years. And that's going to be driven by the fact that a lot of the new workloads are going to be cloud first, so they're not going to be put into on-premises data centers, they're going to be put in the cloud. And we've got a couple things that are going to lead to an explosion of that new computing and storage that's going to be required to support us going forward. Obviously, Internet of Things and mobile driving huge amounts of data into the cloud, and this big data that goes with it. And this just monitoring everything, keeping data around, because data becomes so cheap and because you never know if you can go back and mine it for something useful. Just going to cause a massive explosion on top of the growing compute demands that we would have had anyway, even without these other trends in the way. So that's one of the things that we're going to see. Another one is that we're going to see this evolution towards basically autonomous computing. Kind of the paths that I've been talking about is it really turns the deployment and update model for software around from one where an IT pro is sitting here and configuring virtual machines and deploying the software and treating each one like it's a unicorn, each deployment, and babysitting it, to one where the infrastructure itself is a self-healing, self-repairing, monitoring system. The developers are handing their applications to this system, and it's automatically taking care of getting the deployment of those bits across servers, making sure that they stay healthy, making sure that they stay patched, doing rolling updates in a safe way, without any involvement from the developer or IT pro.
Excellent.
So, Mark, I travelled down on train yesterday and tried to do my due diligence, did my research on your sort of history in computing, and as an IT pro, I've used your tools for the past more years than I care to admit. But I was reading this really interesting tech thriller last night called 0 Day. By this chap called Russinovich. How did you get into writing fiction as well as the day job? Because it's such a big shift. What inspired you to make that shift?
So that book, so just to give context on how that fits into my career timeline, I came up with the idea for 0 Day back in probably 2004 and started writing it in 2005. So that was before I even joined Microsoft. I finished the book, first draft of it, in 2006 as I was joining Microsoft. It wasn't published until 2011. Right. So it took a while to get the book out the door, find a publisher, and then get it published. But what inspired me was reading some of my favorite authors, especially like Michael Crichton when I was growing up, and then Tom Clancy, and this blend of thriller plus technical background where I felt like I was learning something as I was reading it, and it was really kind of hardcore. I also liked hardcore science fiction. So that made me, inspired me to want to write a book that took cybersecurity and presented it in an authentic way with a scenario that I felt and I still feel is a very realistic type of doomsday scenario around cybersecurity, and that is basically terrorists using malware to carry out a mass scale attack on the world. And just thought it'd be fun to write a book that was not like aliens coming from space with, you know, Macintoshes and worms and, you know, things like that, but actually something where security professionals could read it and go, oh, this is interesting, and non-security professionals could read it and say, this is an exciting book, and I'm learning something about the landscape of cybersecurity.
Do you find that the writing is a good way to sort of decompress from the
Yeah,
the
it was
attack?
that too, yeah. So those are kind of the two hobbies, writing and system internals that I've got.
I envy those hobbies. Okay, last question. Everybody that's been sitting watching today is obviously now raring for the chance to find out more about you and keep in touch with what you know. How do people follow you in the online world?
Twitter's really the main place where I'm tweeting out what I'm doing, and information on Azure, information on cybersecurity, information on Microsoft. So that's the best place to connect.
Okay. And what's your Twitter?
Or Russinovich.com is actually where my personal site as well, where I've got the book, information about the books and trailers and snippets from the book that people can read.
And I think you're Mark Russinovich on Twitter.
Yeah, Mark Russinovich.
MarkRussinovich.com and blogs.technic.com/Mark
Yeah.
Russinovich.
You got it.
There you go. And with those three, you can cyberstalk the gentleman next to you. And that's it. Well, I'd just like to say a really big thanks for your time, Mark. It's been really great talking to you on behalf of Robert and myself and the wider MVP community. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Robert.